I never expected to change the galaxy. I was just a woman eating a sandwich next to a dying dragon. Let me back up. My name is Ilara Voss. I am a xenobiologist from Earth, which is a fancy way of saying I study alien creatures for a living. At the time this all started, I was stationed on Kethravar, the volcanic nesting world of the Draconi. If you have never heard of the Draconi, imagine a species of creatures the size of buildings, armored in scales that can shrug off plasma fire, breathing flames hot enough to melt starship hulls. They are the oldest and most powerful species in the galactic concord. They have been flying between stars since humanity was still figuring out how to make bread rise. And me? I was the lowest-ranking scientist on a multi-species observation team. The other researchers came from elder races with thousands of years of medical knowledge. The Sylvani, tall and luminous beings who healed with light and sound. The Lithani, living crystal entities who could scan a body down to its individual cells. The Chelik, insectoid surgeons with 16 arms and precision that would make any human doctor weep with envy. They treated me like a child carrying their luggage. The Sylvani called me Little Mayfly behind my back. The Lithani did not bother learning my name. Humans were the youngest species in the Concord, and nobody let us forget it. I was there to watch the hatching. It happens once every 100 years. Hundreds of Draconi eggs crack open at the same moment, and new dragons enter the world roaring with fire and fury. It is the most sacred event in their culture, and we were allowed to observe only because the Concord insisted on scientific access. The hatching was everything I had imagined and more. The ground shook. The air turned gold with heat. One by one, the eggs split open, and hatchlings the size of horses burst free, already screaming fire at the ceiling, already spreading their wings, already magnificent. I stood in the observation gallery with tears running down my face, and I did not care who saw. Then the last egg opened. It did not crack with thunder. It barely cracked at all. A small piece of shell fell away, and something inside made a sound I had never heard a dragon make before. A whimper. Thin and reedy and uncertain, like a kitten lost in the rain. The hatchling that crawled out was half the size of her siblings. Her wings were translucent, almost see-through, like wet paper. One of her two horns was cracked at the base, leaning sideways. She tried to breathe fire, and what came out was a cough of warm air and a few sad sparks that died before they reached the ground. The broodmothers, the massive elder females who oversaw the nesting grounds, looked at her the way you might look at a clock that has stopped working. One of them rumbled a single word that my translator rendered as Vethkis. Born fading. They expected her to be gone within days. That is how the Draconi handle it. The weak return to the flame, they say. It sounds poetic, but it means they let the runts fade away without interference. To them, it is not cruelty. It is nature completing its design. But the Galactic Concord saw an opportunity for diplomacy, and the broodmothers, under political pressure, agreed to let the Concord's healers attempt to save her. Everyone knew it was a performance. The Draconi were letting the lesser species try and fail, so they could say they had been generous. The Sylvani healer went first. Archmender Yelleth was 700 years old, draped in bioluminescent pollen that pulsed with soothing frequencies. She had healed creatures across 40 star systems. She approached Vethkis slowly, gracefully, radiating calm. She extended one glowing hand. Vethkis screamed. Not in pain, in rejection. The hatchling scrambled backward, her sputtering fire flaring in a wild burst that singed Yelleth's robes. The ancient healer withdrew, her perfect composure cracked for the first time in centuries. The Lithani biomage went next. Construct Oravel did not bother with gentleness. It extended crystalline scanning tendrils toward the hatchling, cool and clinical. Vethkis went still, completely, terrifyingly still. Her heartbeat dropped so low that Oravel's own instruments flagged her as dying. The crystal being withdrew and filed a report labeling the hatchling non-viable. The Chelik surgeon tried chemical sedation and microscopic surgical tools. Vethkis thrashed so hard she hurt her own wing. The surgeon retreated when the hatchling bit clean through one of its instrument arms. After that, more came. A telepathic Moravi empath who could soothe entire populations. A Sporath symbiote specialist who offered living fungal bandages. A gravitonic Uldhari who could restructure tissue with focused gravity fields. 7 species. 12 of the most brilliant healers in the known galaxy. Vethkis rejected every single one. Some she drove away with that wild, desperate fire. Others she shut down against, dropping her own vitals to near nothing, choosing to edge closer to death rather than accept their touch. The message was clear, even if nobody wanted to hear it. She would rather die than let any of them help her. Broodmother Cythera, the eldest and most fearsome of the Draconi matriarchs, closed the chamber. The attempts were over. Vethkis would return to the flame. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on my bunk in the human quarters, which were really just a converted storage room, and I replayed every recording I had made. I watched each healer's approach over and over. I studied Vethkis's biometric readings, and something nagged at me, something I could not name at first. Then I saw it. Her reactions were not random. They were not the blind panic of a sick animal. They were specific, targeted. She responded differently to each healer based on what they projected. The Sylvani radiated an intent to soothe. The Lithani projected clinical assessment. The Chelik approached with the focused intent of repair. And Vethkis, even at days old, could feel all of it. Dragon hatchlings are born with an empathic sense, a primitive ability to read emotional intention. Every healer who walked into that chamber carried the same unspoken message. You are broken. I am here to fix you. That is what she was rejecting. Not the touch, the judgment. I submitted a request to sit with Vethkis. Not to heal her, not to scan her. Just to sit in the same room. My supervising Sylvani researcher laughed out loud when she read it. The request got passed up the chain as a joke. It eventually reached Broodmother Cythera, who granted it with what my translator described as amused contempt. Let the human try, she said. What harm can the weakest species do to the weakest hatchling? I walked into that chamber with nothing. No medical tools, no scanners. No equipment of any kind. I carried a ration pack and a water bottle. I sat down against the far wall, about 6 meters from Vethkis, and I ate my lunch. She watched me with one cracked amber eye. Suspicious. Ready to scream, ready to shut down. I did not look at her directly. I opened my sandwich, and I talked. Not to her, exactly. Just out loud. I talked about rain. I had noticed in my recordings that Vethkis calmed slightly when the volcanic vents released steam, and I thought maybe she liked the sound of falling water. So I described rain on Earth, the way it sounds on a tin roof, the way it smells when it hits hot pavement in summer, the way puddles form in the dips of sidewalks and reflect the whole sky upside down. She did not scream. She did not shut down. She just watched me eat and talk about the weather. I came back the next day. I told her about my apartment back on Earth. About the coffee shop on the corner that always burned the espresso. About the park where I used to run in the mornings. The third day, I told her about Biscuit. Biscuit was my dog. A mutt with 3 legs, 1 ear that flopped sideways, and a tongue that was always hanging out. He was the runt of his litter. The shelter had labeled him unadoptable. I adopted him anyway. I told Vethkis how Biscuit could not run straight, how he wobbled and tumbled and sometimes wiped out on the kitchen floor when he got too excited, and how he was still the happiest creature I had ever met. On the 4th day, Vethkis crawled 3 meters closer. On the 5th day, she was close enough that I could hear her breathing. A small, raspy sound, like wind through a cracked window. On the 6th day, she was at my side. On the 7th day, she rested her cracked horn against my knee, and her fire, that guttering, pitiful spark that had barely stayed alive since she hatched, steadied for the first time. It was not strong, it was not impressive, but it was constant. The scientific community lost its collective mind. The Sylvani demanded to know my technique. The Lithani wanted my methodology. The Chelik requested the chemical compounds I had used. When I told them I had used no technique, no methodology, and no compounds, they did not believe me. When I told them I had just sat there and talked about my dog, they were offended. But I understood something they did not. Every species in the Concord approached the broken with the intent to repair. It was efficient. It was logical. And to an empathic creature who already felt wrong, it was the loneliest thing in the universe. Because repair begins with the assumption that something is damaged, and that assumption has a weight. Humans do something different. I did not learn it from a textbook. I learned it from the way my mother sat with me when I was sick as a child. Not hovering, Not fussing, just being there, with a cup of tea and a bad movie on the television. I learned it from adopting Biscuit, from keeping the dented mug my best friend gave me in college, from every human instinct that says you do not need to be whole to be worthy of love. I helped Vethkis. Slowly, carefully. I wrapped her bent wing with a strip torn from my own jacket, and I let her growl and nip at my fingers while I did it. I made a nutrient paste and held it on my palm, never pushing it toward her mouth, just offering. She ate when she was ready. She always ate when she was ready. The Concord held a tribunal. They said I had overstepped. They said I had contaminated a draconi biological process. Broodmother Cythera demanded custody of the hatchling. 12 elder species filed opinions arguing that a human had no business interfering with draconic evolution. I stood in that chamber, a small woman in a rumpled uniform, surrounded by beings who were older, stronger, and smarter than I would ever be. They asked me to justify my actions. I held up my hand. It was covered in tiny bite marks and claw scratches, each one a memory of trust, earned one painful moment at a time. She chose me, I said. In all your centuries of wisdom, has it ever occurred to you that the patient gets to choose? Vethkis, brought to the tribunal as evidence, broke free from her handlers. She did not fly. She could not fly yet. She ran on unsteady legs across the polished stone floor, skidding, stumbling, and collapsed against my shins. She turned her head toward the assembly and hissed, a tiny, ridiculous, brave sound against a room full of giants. The tribunal ruled in my favor. Months later, Vethkis grew into something nobody expected. Her fire never became the roaring inferno of a normal dragon. Instead, it became something new. A cool, luminous flame that did not burn but glowed. A soft, blue-white light that the Lithiani grudgingly admitted carried unique photonic properties useful for deep space navigation. Her empathic abilities, stunted at birth, developed in ways no dragon had ever displayed. She could read dishonesty, like others read text. She knew when I was sad before I knew it myself. The weakest hatchling was not weak, she was different. And it took a human, a member of the youngest and least respected species in the galaxy, to create enough space for that difference to bloom. At the naming ceremony, where hatchlings receive their true names, Broodmother Cythera approached me. She did not apologize. Draconi never apologize. But she offered me the naming, a right that belongs only to blood. No human had ever been given it. I knelt beside my dragon, now the size of a shuttle, glowing with that impossible cool light. I placed my scarred hand on her cracked horn, the one that never straightened and never would, and I gave her a new name, Aethkis, born enduring. She pressed her enormous head against my chest, and her light filled the chamber, reaching corners that the roaring fires of 100-strong hatchlings could never touch. I sat with her in the glow, and thought about Biscuit, about dented mugs and rainy sidewalks, and every small, stubborn act of love that the galaxy considered beneath its dignity. The universe keeps underestimating us. I hope it never stops.